Okay, we are going to write an algorithm that prints out the contents of a 2D array in a spiral format. So for example, if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, that's 5. Then I would be printing them starting at the 0, 0 position and wrapping around as such, and it makes kind of a spiral pattern. In order to do this, we need to traverse the entire array, and in a 2D array, that's going to end up giving us a big O of m times n, where if m equals the number of rows and n is the number of columns. And so what we're going to do is we're going to first do a little housekeeping and make sure we are working with an array that we can actually work with, like if it's not null and things like that. So let's go ahead and do a little quick test. Okay, if array.length equals 0, then we can throw an exception, or in this case, since we're kind of printing everything, we can just write out array cannot be null. Okay, and then else, if the array is just one element in the array, we can go ahead and take care of that really quickly too, because we're really only going to have one thing to print. And that's going to be array at 0, 0. Okay, otherwise we can jump into our algorithm. Okay, and we're going to need to keep track of a few things. We're going to have our top row, and that starts at 0. So this is kind of always the top row. We're going to want to have our last row. And that is going to equal, I think it's get length of 0 for the rows. That's 1. And then we're going to have a first column. And that's 0. So this is our first column. We'll just put FC. And we're going to have our last column. That's going to be array dot get length at 1. That's 1. Okay, so, and then this is our last column. All right, and so essentially we'll be just moving everything down 1 or up 1 depending on what we're trying to do. So while top row is less than or equal to bottom row, and first column is less than or equal to last column. We will keep looping through. All right, so first thing we want to do is traverse the top row from left to right. So we can do that by making a for loop. And it's going to go from the first column. So we'll start I at the first column. And I is less than or equal to last column. And I plus plus. Okay, and we just simply write console.write. And we want the array at, it's going to be array at top row, because that's what we're traversing. And then I is going to be the thing that keeps changing as we go across the columns. So I, and then we can put a little white space in there. All right. And then after we do that entire traversal, we move our top row to here. So top row plus plus. Okay. So then our next thing we want to do is go down this last column. So from top to bottom. So I starts at the top row, which has moved now to this next row here to position 1. And then we do while I is less than or equal to the last row, I plus plus, and we just do console dot write, and we're going to do I, because now the rows are what is changing, at last column. And we can actually kind of forgot to put the array part in there. So let's just rewrite that real quick. Right, array at I comma last column. And we'll put a little white space in there so it prints all pretty. And then what we needed to do after this was decrement the last column, because we no longer want to be looking at this last column. We'll be now at the next, the column to the left of it. So last column minus minus. Okay. Now we're going to go to this next section here, this first column. Oh no, sorry, we're on the row. Now we're going to go to the last row. And because the 2D array might not be like symmetrical, it might not be 4 by 4, it might be 4 by 3 or 4 by 1. We have to actually test to make sure that there is a row that exists. So as long as top row is less than or equal to the last row, then we know that we can go ahead and traverse. If we don't test for that, it's not going to work properly. It might work properly if it's like a 4 by 4 or a perfect array, but if it's not symmetrical, then it wouldn't work. Okay, so now we want to go, we're going across from the last column to the first column. So that's going to equal last column I is greater than or equal to first column, and then I minus minus. And we would just do console dot write array at last row, comma I. Okay, and then now that we have worked on this last row, we know we can decrement it. So last row, and actually we can do that outside of this if statement here. Okay, and then now we want to do this first column from bottom to top. So we're going to also have to check, because that column might not exist depending on the dimensions of the array. So if first column is less than or equal to the last column, then we know we can go ahead and do our for statement and int I, and we're going from the last row. And so we want I to be greater than or equal to the top row, I minus minus. Okay, and we do a console dot write array at, okay, I is what's changing here because we're going by the row, and then first column is what we're looking at. Okay, and that'll get us out of that if statement and for loop, and then all we have to do is increase the first column. And that should take care of it. So, because then we'll loop back around and we'll just keep going as things are, and the rows and columns are incrementing and decrementing to get us to where we need to be. So let's go ahead and run through this. Here's our end of our while. Here's our end of our function. They're kind of in line, but we're out of room. So what we want to do is let's walk through this with an example. We'll get some all new numbers in there. Okay. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Let's keep it an uneven array so that we can make sure that we're catching that condition properly. So first thing we do is we go through and we see if our array is 0. It's not, so we don't do that. Else, if array.length equals 1, that's not true either. So we go into our final else statement. So we're going to want to keep track of top row, bottom row, maybe I should just abbreviate these actually so we don't run out of space. Okay, we have our top row, we called it last row, first column, last column, and we've also got an I, or incrementer throughout this, and that's going to keep going up and down throughout, but it's good to keep track of it. Okay, so first thing we do, top row is 0. Last row is array.length at 0 minus 1, so that's its length of the 4, so that's a 3. And first column is 0, and last column array.length at 1, and that's going to be 2. All right, because it's a minus 1 there. All right, so while top row is less than or equal to the bottom row, and first column is less than or equal to the last column. So we're meeting those conditions. We can go into our while loop, and then we say, okay, int I equals first column. So first column is 0. I is less than or equal to last column, so it's going to be less than or equal to 2 this time around. Console.write array at top row. Let's actually number these really quick so that it's easier to go through the numbers. All right, so console.write array at top row, which is 0, and I is 0. So we're going to write the 1. We can just write here. All right. And then I plus plus. So I becomes 1, and 1 is less than or equal to 2. So we write the next one, top row is 0, I is 1, so 0, 1 is 2. So we print 2. Okay, I plus plus, and 2 is still less than or equal to the last column. So we go to, oops, I just totally did this backwards. And last row should be 2, and last column should be, we'll swap those. Okay. So there we go. So, oh, no, I just did exactly the same thing that I had. Okay. Last row is 2, last column is 3. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so I was 2. We're going to print at top row 2, and that's a 3. Okay, I plus plus, I is 3. 3 is less than or equal to 3. So top row is 0 at I, which is 3. So we print the 4. I plus plus becomes 4. 4 is not less than or equal to 3. So we jump out of there. And we can restart our I. Okay, so top row plus plus right after that for loop. So top row becomes 1. All right, so for int I equals top row, so I is 1. I is less than or equal to the last row, which is 2. I plus plus. Okay, so console.write array at I. So I is 1. Last column, and last column is 3. So we're going to print 8. I plus plus. 2 is less than or equal to 2. So we look at array at I, which is 2, and the last column, which is 3, and we get the 12. Print that. I plus plus. If 3 is less than or equal to last row is 2, so we get out of that for loop. And last column minus minus. So last column becomes 2. Okay, we'll restart our I. Okay, so if top row, which is 1, is less than or equal to the last row, which is 2, then we can do this next statement. So that condition is met. So for int I equals last column, so last column is 2, so I starts at 2, and I is going to be greater than or equal to first column, and first column is 0, so 2 is greater than 0. Console.write array at last row, so last row is 2, so array at last row, I, which is 2. Which is here, 11. All right. So we print 11. All right, and then we do I minus minus, so I becomes 1. And we go in and say, is 1 greater than equal to our first column? Yes, 1 is greater than 0. So array at last row, which is 2, and then I, which is 1, and that's the 10. So we print 10. And we do I minus minus, and I becomes 0. 0 is greater than or equal to the first column. So we go in and we look at last row, which is still 2, and we go to I, which is 0, so we print the 9. Okay, and then we go in and last row minus minus. So 2 becomes 1. Okay, let's go ahead and reset our I. And we get if first column is less than or equal to the last column. So first column is 0, last column is 2, so that condition is met. Okay, for int I equals last row, so I starts at 1. I is greater than or equal to the top row, which is 1, and I minus minus. All right, so console.write array at I, and I is 1, and first column, so that's this 5. Okay, and then we do I minus minus, and I is 1, so it becomes 0, and the first column is still 0, so we met that condition. And let's see, it looks kind of like it might not work quite right. We might have something a little bit off. If I is last column, which was 2, oh, it's because I'm in the wrong thing here. So if I equals last row, which is 1, last row, I is greater than or equal to the top row, and top row is 1. So I was looking at the wrong line, thank goodness. All right, so we go through, and now I is not greater than or equal to top row because I became 0, so we get out of that. And then first column plus plus becomes 1. Okay, so now we can loop through here to our while statement. While top row is less than or equal to the bottom row, so that's true, 1 is equal to 1, and first column is less than or equal to the last column, and that's true because first column's 1 and last column's 2. So we go into our while loop, and let's go ahead and reset this I. So for I equals first column, that's a 1, and I is less than or equal to last column, which is a 2. Console.write array at top row, so top row is 1, and I is 1, so we're going to write the 6, and then I plus plus, so I becomes 2, and is 2 less than or equal to last column? Yes, it is. So then we go in and we say array at top row, which is 1, at I, which is 2, and we print the 7. Okay, I plus plus. Okay, now 3 is not less than or equal to 2. So we get out of that for loop, and top row plus plus. So top row becomes 2. All right, and then we move on to the next for loop. Okay. I equals top row, and top row is 2. I is less than or equal to the last row, which is 1. This condition does not work, so we don't go into this for loop at all. So we move on, and we go ahead and do last column minus minus, so that becomes 1. Now, if, let's cross those out just not to be confused, and so if top row, let me reset my, if top row is less than or equal to last row, so if top row is 2 and it is less than or equal to the last row, which is 1, we could go, but this is not the case. So we skip this. We do last row minus minus, last row is 0. If first column is less than or equal to the last column, so first column is less than or equal to the last column, so we do go into this statement. So, and I equals last row, so I is 0. I is greater than or equal to top row, which is not the case. Top row is 2. So we don't go into this, and first column plus plus. Okay. So we go into our while loop up top and we say top row is less than or equal to bottom row. So here top row is 2 and last row is 0. And that's so that condition doesn't meet. So we would automatically get out first column is less than or equal to the last column as well. Well, yeah, so we would have to evaluate both of those. And then since that's the case, we get out of our while loop and we can now look at our output and see how we did. So we went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 8 to 12 to 11 to 10 to 9 to 5 to 6 to 7. So we did it. We printed a spiral from a 2D array. And again, that is done in O of M n time. So M times N.